see if this man is happy on Sunday. Philly's own Meek Mill. I think we should just drop Wale for the rest of the show, but that's just me. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. I'm Craig Hoffman, and I'm back. Let me tell y'all, yesterday, the level I was sick, y'all realize how down bad I had to be to miss a show this week? Oh, my God. That was awful. I basically didn't leave. The only place I left my bed for all day was my couch. And it was just about every 5-hour shuttle run between the two. Yesterday was one of my least favorite days I've ever been alive. And missing a show during NFC Championship week when the Commanders are in it, let me tell y'all, that was not in the plans. But appreciate Doc and Linnell for filling in. I know they had a bunch of our favorites on, including our usual Thursday hit with Dan Pizzuta. I know Sheehan was nice enough to stop by, so appreciate everybody doing that. Ant, good work yesterday. I know that was not the curveball you expected this week, but I couldn't miss two. I'm back. Yesterday, my Whoop recovery said I was 1% recovered. I'm back to 17, and I'm back in the chair, baby.
Hey, that's better than where you were, man. One is actually insane.
It is.
I mean, you were really down bad.
That was brutal. I can remember there's like 2 or 3 other times in my life that I've been at 1%, and that was way like we'll talk about in the fitness world. People who can't do one pull-up. There's a wide range of people who can't do one pull-up, right? There's people who have no shot of doing a pull-up, and then there's people that are really, really close. And technically, both of them can't do one pull-up. I feel like that was the difference in the 1%. They just don't go any lower on the scale. If there could have been a minus 45%, I would have been a minus 45% yesterday. It should have, when I went on that thing, it should have said, stay your ass in bed.
Yeah.
I don't know why I ever got up yesterday. It was terrible. But I'm back. And hopefully that's not a mistake. Hopefully I don't wind up curled up on my couch with the shivers like I did after Wednesday's show. But we're going to, whatever it is, there's no show tomorrow. And then there's an NFC Championship game on Sunday. And that is, of course, where we spend most of our time today. We have an incredible guest list to talk about the game with, including the man who was under center the last time Washington was in an NFC Championship game. That's right, Mark Rypien is going to join us at 5:30. Also, there are 2 men who are doing play-by-play for this game. One on television, one on the radio. They're both joining us in the next hour because Ian Eagles with us at 4:30, calling the game on Westwood One Radio. Of course, that broadcast can be heard right here on the Team 980. That's right, we got the game on Sunday. And Kevin Burkhardt, along with Tom Brady, will be on Fox this weekend. Kevin is going to join us coming up at 5 p.m. So we are locked, we are loaded. Give you a little bit of Logan as well and some Take Command at 6:30. But Anthony, sometimes the more I talk about a game during a week, I wind up focusing on like one thing that I didn't necessarily expect earlier in the week to be the main thing for the game. The more I've talked about this game, like this game actually isn't that interesting. It's interesting from a storyline standpoint. It's interesting from a narrative standpoint. You have a team that was expected to be here in Philly, but also a team that, like, Philly's got some great stories in terms of, like, arc, right? Last year, they collapsed down the stretch. They have all this internal consternation. They kind of started this year with a lot of that stuff seemingly bubbling over. It seems like Sirianni and Hurts were, like, kind of low-key fighting. How would they adapt to the new coordinators? And then they just lock in the middle of the season. They've been amazing. And the only team to beat them as of late was this Washington team after they knocked Hurts out of the game. And that in itself is a storyline. Obviously, the storylines on Washington's side of it are endless. But from like a football schematic standpoint, in part because the Eagles are kind of boring on that front, they're so talented that they just kind of let their talent do their talent stuff. Like there's not nearly as much to talk about as like last week with the Lions. Last week, it was like, how much is Aaron Glenn blitz? What kind of blitzes? Do they play man? Do they play zone? Do they back off some of their stuff? What does Cliff do? There's some options here. And then he wound up doing like this, leaning back into the college offense thing with the super wide splits and the 10 personnel. All that stuff was really interesting. And maybe there's some stuff, the meat on the bone this week and I actually think there's some merit to some of that I can get to in a second. And then on the other side, it was, oh my God, their Lions are good at everything. How do you both stop this explosive passing game and also stop Jahmyr Gibbs in the run? And David Montgomery's back, and this offensive line is amazing. How do you generate pressure? And like a lot of those questions exist, but because we've seen these two teams play twice, it just doesn't feel as mystery riddled as a lot of playoff games do, and especially ones where you've got so much focus on it. And it just kind of feels like it's going to come down to, like, which MVP candidate balls out more. Is it Saquon for the Eagles or Jaden for the Commanders? And if Jaden goes out and loses his mind and has 5 touchdowns again, the Commanders are probably going to win. And if Saquon goes out and has 3 touchdowns and 2 70-yarders, the Eagles are probably going to win. And in a way that's, like, I don't know, it's simple. I don't know if it's nice, because I don't know how great any Commanders fan in their heart of hearts feels about stopping Saquon. But, like, a lot of the stuff, and maybe, I mean, this is why the coordinators, and they're paid a lot of money. They're a lot smarter than all of us. But, like, if you're Joe, you just put 8 in the box, and, like, they have a lot finer teaching points of, hey, making sure, and Dan does a good job of talking about this stuff in the press sometimes of, like, how do you become a good tackler? Well, you got to really attack the inside hip, and, you know, have to be really super awesome in our gap discipline and all this kind of stuff. It's not sexy, and there's a lot of teaching that has to go into that on the actual practice field. But realistically, like, in terms of us talking about it, that's not very exciting. And then on the other side, it's like, who's going to start at right guard? Are they going to die against Jalen Carter? And if not, then can Jaden Daniels be awesome against a defense that does not give up a lot of space, does not give up a lot of air, is the best explosive defense in the league, but Jaden broke them last time. He found explosive plays. And maybe some of the formation stuff, like, do you use some of those trips and bunches and wide splits and, you know, try to get Zach Bond to be in places he's not used to being and whatever, but, like, they're so fast and they're so disciplined that I don't know that you can do some of that stuff in the way that you could to Detroit. And maybe Cliff will come up with something this weekend, and if so, then, like, I can't wait to talk about that stuff next week. And if it works out, great, then we're going to have weeks to talk about it leading up to a Super Bowl appearance, which would be ungodly cool. But it just kind of on the most simple level really comes down to which MVP candidate is going to play better. If it's Saquon, the Eagles probably win. Like 90% the Eagles win. If it's Jaden, it's like 90% that the Commanders win. And, like, in a way that's cool, but in a way, I don't know how much more there is to talk about than that. And we have 2 hours and 45 minutes left in our show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is simple, but it's also confusing just because in the last matchup, where the Commanders won, you know, Saquon still had a big outing. Granted, after the first quarter, it wasn't that big.
Well, that was the thing. It was a condensed big outing.
Yeah. And the Eagles end up, you know, winning the time of possession by, like, more than 12 minutes in that game. And, you know, Jaden, he struggled, and then, like, he came on late. So, like, my thing is, like, it sounds like super simple, but it's also confusing because if you're to tell me the Eagles are going to win the time of possession, Saquon was going to go out there, rush for $150, have 2 tuds, I'm thinking, like, oh, the Eagles won that game. But guess what? The Commanders end up winning the game. Jaden end up balling out. So there's a lot to it when, you know, you look at the game.
I guess that is true. And the other thing, too, is, like, what's the game script? Can they get ahead? The Eagles have trailed for 5 minutes since they went down. They're like, since Jamison Crowder scored that touchdown, which is the very end of that game, right? The Eagles have trailed for 5 total minutes throughout the rest of the season, week 17 and 18, and then the 2 playoff games. 5. They don't play from behind. And so, can you do that? Well, that sounds like a great plan for Washington, except for the part where when they beat them in week 16, they came from behind to win.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is kind of the funky thing about Washington is they'll play any type of game. If they can get up on you and just start bruising you as running, you know, with the run, where, like, you're trying to dedicate guys here, but then Jaden pulls one, like, they can win that kind of game, salting it away, just quick decisions from Jaden, milk clock, time of possession. They love to play that style. They will do that with you all day. And then if you give them opportunities for big ones, they'll take them. Ask Detroit, right? But also, if they need to just drop Jaden back 40 times, they can do that too. And I think as long, again, huge caveat, as long as they can protect Jaden, I'm trying to make this game a track meet if I'm Washington. Like, I want this thing to be fast-paced, up-tempo. I want to hit big plays. I want Philly to feel threatened. I want them to feel not only threatened defensively, where they start to question some of their stuff, Or, hey, we don't give up big plays. What's happening to us? Or like, okay, we can't give up big plays. So like now there's a bunch of space underneath, and this usually airtight defense that just is, their zone match stuff is incredible of how they lock on to guys. There's just not air in this defense the way there is against almost everyone else in the NFL. That they also feel the pressure offensively. Like, we can't just hand the ball to Saquon all day because they're playing 8 in the box and like we need to score. And I would live with that. And even if you give up a couple of big explosives, if A.J. Brown gets one on Marshawn Lattimore, I'm not going to say who cares, but kind of who cares. If he gets 4 on Lattimore, okay, now we got a problem. Now we probably need to play some too high. Now we need to show some different looks. But like, I want Jalen Hurts to throw the football. I want him to beat me as a passer. I want him to, and it sucks because typically what I would do against Jalen Hurts if he doesn't have Saquon Barkley is I'm playing 2 high shells and I'm begging him to beat me with short, intermediate passes underneath where he's got to read it out and find holes in the zone. Because I don't think he can do it at the level that my guy can do it. And if the game becomes a tit for tat of that, then advantage Commanders. Eventually, he's going to make a mistake. He's going to throw a pick. He's going to hold the ball too long, take a sack, maybe a sack fumble. Like, that's who Jalen Hurts has been as a quarterback outside of 2022 when he played it out of his mind, apparently, because he hasn't been the same guy since, and he was not the same guy before that. So, but the problem is you play too high, so you only got 7 in the box, and now you're inviting Saquon to run it, and now you're dead. So that sucks. So I think the mix of getting that right, figuring out how to play successfully when you do play with light boxes, which might involve the Daron Payne and Edge package, play heavier but in a light box, less people, heavier people, versus, all right, let's beg Jalen to throw it and try to get him to check out of some stuff. I think that chess match is going to be fun, but it's fairly rudimentary compared to some of the other stuff that I think we've seen in the playoffs with all the blitzes and kind of the more exotic stuff that Tampa and Detroit throw at you on both sides of the ball. So very simple. Which MVP candidate plays better on Sunday? Man, both these guys have been nails in the playoffs so far. So that's going to be a fun one to talk about over the next 3 hours. Again, Ian Eagle joins us. He's calling the game on the radio, which you can hear on the Team 980 this weekend, 4:30. Ian is with us. Kevin Burkhardt at 5. Mark Rypien at 5:30. We're locked and loaded on a Friday edition of The Hoffman Show. proper DC music. It's the Hoffman Show. Can't believe you opened the show with Meek Mill. Love Meek. Not this week. What are you doing?
My bad.
It's off the show.
You pointed it out, and it hadn't hit
bad
me
about
before I, decided to play the hour opener.
Sheesh. I leave for one day. And this is what I come back to. It's the Hoffman Show. Greg Hoffman, happily back in the chair. Here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Ian Eagle is going to join us coming up in just 7 minutes here on the Team 980. So, Anthony, I asked you in the break, hey, what's interesting to you about this game? What do you want to talk about? And you went full fan mode on me. What'd you say?
I mentioned the refs who are going to be reffing out games because they reffed out games early in the season, and boy, was there a lot of controversy when they did ref those games.
Yeah, so this has come up. I've had a couple people ask me to address this week on Blue Sky, on Instagram, on TikTok. It's come YouTube. It's come in every form, and I guess I can address it here. So Sean Hockley is going to be the referee this weekend, and the Eagles are 6-0 when he is refereeing games this year. The Eagles have won a lot of football games. It's not because of Sean Hockley. It's because they're really good. Is that coincidence? Yeah, I think it is. Now, Sean Hockley also was the referee for the Saints game where they had the clock debacle at the end and some other controversial calls. And there's been a couple of other games that Sean Hockley has reffed. Well, there's been some bad ones. And Anthony, I actually have a funny Sean Hockley story, if I may. I didn't tell you this part in the break, but you ready for this?
Yes, sir.
So, shout out to my guy Scott Dipp if he's listening. Scott and his wife Courtney. Courtney used to be my boss. My first ever boss in the fitness world was Courtney. And Scott, her husband, and their son Kyrie, who's like a 9-year-old at this point. I can't believe Kyrie's like 9. God, I'm ancient. How old is he? He's like a sick football player for being a little kid. But Kyrie was probably like 5 at this point. This is back when I was on the beat, maybe even younger. And Scott and Kyrie are on the sideline before a game. And I'm hanging out with them. They got in field passes. And Sean Hockley comes over and says hi and like lets Kyrie take, I think he like put on his hat or whatever. Like it was really cool. Like Sean could not have been nicer. Awesome dude. So nice to Kyrie. And then he was so bad in that game. I was still so mad after. I was just like, this dude, like, and yes, Sean Hockley is Ed Hockley's son, the legendary bicep referee. And I just have never watched a Sean Hockley game and been like, that's a well-refereed game. The only time I've ever been impressed with Sean Hockley, there's actually been 2. 1, how nice he was to my friend's son. And 2, when he was the referee for the German game this year and he made the call in German.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, that was a nice touch.
Yeah.
Well done. So I've always been biased to want to like Sean Hockley as a referee. Unfortunately, Sean Hockley's refereeing has never let me like Sean Hockley as a referee. With that said, these things tend to balance out. And even in some of the games this year where Washington has gotten jobbed on some calls, there's been some others that go in their favor. Last week, that face mask on Dante Fowler is heinously bad. One that I think next season will be able to be overturned on review. Like, that's how bad that was. I think next year, because the instant review has been so good this year, I think they're going to expand the scope of that. At least I hope they expand the scope of that to get more stuff right quickly. Wow, hey, guys, that was really egregious. We missed that. Never mind. Right? But they also didn't call Luvu for the helmet-to-helmet on Jared Goff on the return from Quan. And maybe Jaden would have just punched in another touchdown anyway. The interception would have still counted. But that could have easily been a 15-yard penalty on Oos. So I'm trying to remember some of the other ones this year because I feel like there were some bad calls in Atlanta against New Orleans. Obviously, I mean, the clock situation in New Orleans is diabolically bad. I mean, that's one where if the NFL decided after the game to be like, hey, guys, game was over. We're changing the result. I would have been like, good. That is just. That is justice. But typically, bad calls, like refs are typically just bad. And sometimes one team gets disproportionately jobbed, and it always feels like it's your team because that's what it's like being a fan. But if you're objective about it, it typically evens out, which is why when you watch games between two teams where you don't care who wins, you very rarely find yourself complaining about the reffing with the same refs who you hate when they ref your team. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. But at the same token, Craig, I would be able to see if there's like a huge discrepancy in calls, though. The fact in the Falcons game, it was 13-4, and then in the Saints game, it was 9-4. It's just like, there has to be like some,
the one thing
balance.
I'll say, yeah, I mean, look, have the Commanders been on the bad end of some refereeing?
Yes.
They have, for sure. Is it as bad as most Commanders fans think? Probably not.
You're right.
Has it been bad? Yeah. You know what also is in common between the Saints and the Falcons game? They won.
Yeah.
So, if you don't leave it close enough to be in the referee's hands, then it's not an issue. Go out and beat the crap out of them. I don't think Lions fans are complaining about that golf call this week. They're complaining about the interceptions that he threw.
I mean,
leave no doubt.
That's fair. But again, Craig, the holding penalties, though, there's holding on every play. Holding on every play.
There is. I would say the one thing I would say about the holds is if you're going to use that chop technique where Cosme got multiple times, I think in the Atlanta game, you better go to the refs beforehand and be like, hey, this is something that we do. If a dude falls on his face, it's probably because I did this, not because I'm holding.
Yeah.
So don't be a terrible ref and call it. All right, when we get back, Ian Eagle. Of course, you know him from the NFL on CBS. He's also one of the NFL's play-by-play voices on Westwood One Radio, and he's got the game this weekend. We talk to Ian next on the Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube too at the Team 980. And this weekend, you can hear the NFC Championship game right here on the Team 980, courtesy of Westwood One Sports. It'll be Ian Eagle, Kurt Warner, and Ross Tucker on the call. And it is our pleasure to welcome back to the show my good friend, one of those three men. It's Ian Eagle. Ian, how are you, my friend?
I thought you were about to say Ross Tucker, my good friend, but no, you're going with me in that category.
No, you are the one on the phone right now. I mean, you're definitely of those three in my personal life, Ian. I would want to have you anyway, of course, but you are the easiest one for me to get a hold of.
And I think about all the times, Craig, that we've spoken through the years on this show, and to imagine for a moment in any of those conversations that you thought we would be having this conversation this year for this particular stage is pretty extraordinary, considering where this franchise was, considering the high level of dysfunction that the team had been through. And to have this metamorphosis just to get to this place on NFC Championship weekend is saying quite a bit. This is quite an accomplishment for this organization.
It's truly remarkable, and it was actually even more solidified for me, Ian, with a couple of guests that we had this week. And actually, folks will hear this conversation in 30 minutes. But I talked to Kevin Burkhardt yesterday, who's calling the game, obviously, on Fox. And I had Kevin on basically a year ago when they hired Dan Quinn. And the same thing with Scott Pioli when they hired Adam Peters. And it was like, wait, the last time I talked to you guys was a year ago when they were hiring these folks. And now I'm talking to you one calendar year later, and they're in the NFC Championship game. But Ian, I talked to you in like the middle of the season when they I know you had him for Carolina for CBS, and I think there was one other later in the season when you were here as well.
Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh.
That's right. So, I mean, that's probably one of their worst performances of the season. At either of those points, did you think that there was a smattering of a chance, even this season, that we would be talking on NFC Championship Sunday?
Well, I knew they were better, and I knew that everything within that building had changed. The whole vibe within their facility was different, and you could feel that. When you walk in, there was just a different feeling. That doesn't always translate into wins. That doesn't always translate into playoff wins. And sometimes it's not even something tangible that the fans can notice because they're not privy to that. They just know what they see on Sundays or Thursdays or Mondays, whenever the game is played. That's what you go off of. And by the way, that's how it works. I get it. But because you can go in with the television crew and get a little more insight and look someone in the eye and talk to them, there was no doubt in my mind that it was real. This was not made up. This was not just rhetoric. Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels and the litany of players that we met with, Zach Ertz and Terry McLaurin, and on and on and on, Bobby Wagner, you could see that this was not just a nice little story of a bump up from one year to the next, which happens all the time in the NFL. The NFL is known for worst to first. It happens. But what doesn't normally happen is you feel a very seismic shift for a franchise this quickly, that this team has a chance to have sustainable success. No matter what happens on Sunday, this team is heading in the right direction with the right decision makers in place and the right personnel and cohesive players that believe in one another that can possibly maintain this for a long period of time. And that's where you want to be as an NFL fan. You want to be a part of a team like that, not one that pops up every now and again and then goes back into oblivion. You want to be part of the team that can maintain it, and they appear to be equipped to do that.
Ian Eagles got the play-by-play this weekend on Westwood One. You can hear the game 3 o'clock Sunday on the Team 980 for the Commanders and Eagles. And obviously, Ian, they did a lot of stuff right. And I've probably asked you a version of this question during the season, but for those that may have missed it, I'm going to ask it again. But when you sit down with Daniels and you talk to him and you've been doing this a long time. You talk to a lot of great quarterbacks, and I'm sure there's something that is at least similar about so many of them. What is the thing about him that stands out, that's different, or I would say alike to maybe others, but different from any rookie that perhaps that you've ever sat with, or rare to rookies that you've sat with?
Maturity, composure, wise beyond his years, all of those things that you can gather in a meeting. And then the things that he's doing on the field speak for themselves. This has been the best rookie season for a quarterback in NFL history. And it's not just based on numbers, it's based on impact. It's based on how the team has followed him and the fact that he got respect very early, and not because he got a big contract or because he was taken number 2 overall or because he's a former Heisman Trophy winner. Not for any of those reasons. The thing in the NFL that you quickly realize is people figure it out quickly. And doesn't matter what your signing bonus is. Once you're in that locker room, there is something else that has to take place in terms of leadership that can only be earned. And he earned it early because of his work ethic and because of the way that he carries himself. And that's apparent in the production meetings. Look, I've had so many of these meetings where I think young quarterbacks often will just go off of a handbook. And there are some current quarterbacks that I can think of that I had early in their career where they were saying all the things that they thought they needed to say. And then later on in their career, you can feel the earnestness and the genuine quality finally coming through, where the veneer is broken and they can be a bit more forthright because they've experienced things, because they've had ups and downs. For him to be at that place so early really stood out. Charles Davis, Evan Washburn, our producer Ken Mack, director Suzanne Smith, Brian Jagoda, who is our tape producer, they were all in the meeting. And everybody walked out and looked at one another and said, oh boy, this is at another level.
So you have him, obviously, as the most important centerpiece. What's impressed you about the infrastructure they've put around him, whether it's the people, the scheme? What stands out to you about how they've allowed him to become the best version of himself, even though it seems like any version of him probably would have been pretty good?
Yeah, he was probably going to be good anyway, but the one thing about the NFL that you do recognize that it doesn't come down to just one person. There are so many others that play a role, and it's the right fit, right system, right people. Cliff Kingsbury, he's got the right experience. He's done it. He's done it with big-time QBs. He's done it on bigger stages. He's had all the responsibility as the head coach, and now back to the OC mentality where he could just laser into what is required day to day, and the fact that they hit it off, and the fact that there was a strong give and take, and they developed the necessary chemistry, not just on game day when you're calling the plays, but Monday through Saturday when you're working through the game plan and you're trying to figure out what works best. And then beyond that, having a sit down with Zach Ertz and the fact that he's been through a lot and he was nearly out of the league, and his appreciation and the experience that he had with a variety of quarterbacks. And for Jaden to lean on that, the professionalism of Terry McLaurin, and then Dan Quinn. Dan is just one of those people that realized that he needed to get better. He needed to improve at his trade and did so in a big way before he went to Dallas, coming off Atlanta, where he did a lot of things right. They were obviously a player or two away from winning the Super Bowl, and his whole life is different, and Matt Ryan's life is different. So when that doesn't work out and you now have to go back to the drawing board, you lose your job, you're trying to build it back up, you go to Hawaii and you regather and try to figure out where you can be better in life, and you allow someone to come in and do an assessment of you, an honest one, and make improvements, that speaks to who you are. And not everybody would do that, or some might do it but not actually take the advice. I think Dan realized he needed to make some adjustments and alterations in how he goes about his business and his delegation, and then his overall feel day to day with his group, with his players, with his staff, connection to the front office, of course, with Adam Peters. That's what you strive for in big-time sports, when you can get to that place where there's honesty and forthrightedness and transparency more than anything else. And I think that's a big reason why, in addition to chemistry and this team delivering week in and week out, especially the last 7 weeks. But there's more to it, and that's what makes football such a great game. It's so intricate, and if one thing is off, it can affect so many in this game.
If I asked you for stories on coach or player, but especially coach, like hubris or ego, you'd probably have a lot more of them than humility in your years of calling NFL and NBA games. But are there other successful people that you, like, their humility stands out, that they would do the type of thing that Dan did? Like, how, I guess really what I'm asking is, how rare is that? Are there any other examples that immediately come to mind?
I think it's rare, and I think those that have done it probably wouldn't have been so public about it, because it's admitting an insecurity and a vulnerability. You're acknowledging that, okay, I rose to the top of the profession, but even I didn't have all the answers. Most coaches don't ever acknowledge that. I think you could go across major sports and probably cherry pick a few here or there that if you got them in that honest moment, they would share with you what they learned and how they learned it and the humility that was required to do it. But most would not. They're going to maintain the image that they want projected out there. I just think Dan went back to square one, and it takes a special kind of person to realize that and then build this thing back up. And I know he is trying not to use the word rebuild, and I guess if you want to start using different terms, you can, but it is the revival of a franchise. And we know, just look around at the hires that have been made the last few days, from city to city, from organization to organization. It's not easy. This is not an easy thing to do. If it was easy, every team would do it. The fact that this team struck gold in this way, it's not easy to sustain either. But if you have the right people in key positions, you have a chance to keep this thing rolling.
Ian Eagle, Westwood One, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So when you look at this game this weekend, Ian, I opened the show, saying, like, I've been talking about this game all week, been thinking about it a lot, and I kind of think it just comes down to which MVP candidate plays better. Is it Jaden Daniels or is it Saquon Barkley? Is there some other thing that could determine this game, like outside of the wacky, what weird ball bounces, whatever, that kind of stuff? It's football. Anything could happen. But This does feel a little bit simpler in the analysis than some of the other playoff matchups that I can remember recently.
Yeah, the only other part I would view it through this lens is Philadelphia has some players and talent that have been a bit dormant in this postseason. So if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith go off and have one of those games where Jalen Hurts hits them on a big pass, big play, long touchdown, game-changing plays that we just haven't seen in the first 2 weeks of the postseason from Philadelphia, you might look back on this game and say, oh, man, how did I not think about that or talk about that? Saquon, I still think, is going to get his. You're not stopping this guy this year. This combination of running back and offensive line, it's lethal. You're not going to stop him. There's no possible way. I know we make absolutes in this business, but I don't see how there's a way that you look up at the end of this game, barring injury, and you say, man, they held Saquon Barkley to 71 yards rushing. It's not going to happen. He is going to get his. The question is, do you limit it to just him? Is there somebody else for Philadelphia that steps forward and has one of those memorable games that you always recall when you go on a Super Bowl run? And that's really what this is. Somebody's going to walk away from this on route to New Orleans in Super Bowl 59 with something incredibly memorable, and it may not be the two players that you mentioned. It may not be Jaden Daniels, and it may not be Saquon Barkley. Is there somebody else that becomes an X factor in a game like this?
Well, certainly one of the main candidates would be Jalen Carter on the defense for the Eagles.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen from him and kind of how that entire group has coalesced around him that has been so impressive this year?
I think he made the biggest play of the game last week. When I think about it now in the sequence of events at the end of the game and now looking back on it, I worked the game last week with CD, with Charles on the radio side. His play on third down with the clock winding down, the sack, the domination of getting to Matthew Stafford, and then in my mind, I thought it in the moment, and I really believe it now, it just threw them off their axis for a moment. As time started trickling away, the clock wasn't as big an issue because they knew it came down to fourth down. You had to convert. And it didn't appear to be the best of play calls, and Stafford airmailed it to the right side, incomplete, game over. But the sack just affected the momentum. At that point, I don't know what you felt watching the game. I certainly felt it in the stadium. The Rams had that winning feeling. Yeah. They were moving down the field. They were cashing in on plays. Stafford had command in that moment. And on third down, I still believed that they had a legitimate chance to win the game. And after that sack, it just seemed to throw everything off. So he's been so strong and productive for them. He's a big time player. We know that he dropped in the draft in 2023 because of other issues and some terrible things that happened at Georgia. The reality is no one ever questioned his abilities and his agility and his all-out hustle. It's there consistently. He's a Pro Bowler for a reason. He deserved it. He played at a legitimate Pro Bowl level this year.
What is it about, as we wrap up with Ian Eagle here, Westwood One, play-by-play man who will be on the call for the NFC Championship game this weekend? What is it about just the best pass rushers that not only are they prolific in their production, but whether it's what Aaron Donald used to do, he did this all the time. Yep. TJ Watt is one of the best at this, that just in the big moments, they're able to come through time and time again. And Carter seems to be the next one in line to do that, as he proved last week on that play.
Yeah, there's brute strength, which that's just given to you from great genes and work ethic and obviously maximizing what you offer physically. And then I think with great pass rushers, there's a relentlessness that you can't truly judge at a combine. And I don't even think you can gather it from a meeting, an interview. You can get some of it. You can get a sense of what someone's all about. When we sit down with TJ Watt, there is something else in his eyes. There is something else in his aura. And I sense it with all the great pass rushers. There's this switch that they can flip at a moment's notice. And I've seen it time and time again. I do think Carter has that. It's a really special quality. There might only be 6 players year in, year out with the role changing based on where someone is in their career, what year they're in, what their production level is. But there might be 6 to 10 a year in the NFL that you can put in that category and that category alone. There's just that other upper echelon of pass rushers that, as you stated, Craig, can do it when the time is right and when the team needs it the most.
Which, if the Commanders have the ball late on Sunday, considering what happened last time, that was the scenario in Week 16.
Yes.
Jaden Daniels was able to get the upper hand and lead them down the field. Would be a whole lot of fun to see if they can stave off Carter one more time. Ian Eagle will be there calling all the action in Philadelphia, and you'll hear it right here on the Team 980, courtesy of Westwood One. Ian, always appreciate your time, my friend. And, man, I can't believe we're doing this, but here we are. Have a great time calling the Commanders in the NFC Championship game on Sunday.
Yeah, enjoy it. I'm sure it's a great time in the DMV, and savor these moments because, as we know, it's been 32 years in between them for Washington and for the fan base, so it's pretty special.
Yeah, but who's counting?
Well, I am.
Okay.
I've got to write it down on my notes.
Yeah, no, that's probably a smart one for you to have. Thanks, buddy.
See you, man.
All right, that's Ian Eagle with us here on the Hoffman Show. Speaking of what happened 32 years ago, Mark Rypien was the quarterback the last time the Commanders, Washington, was in the NFC Championship game. Mark joins us at 5:30 today. Yeah, we got Mark Rypien today. What's up? And if you're not listening on the radio this weekend, you'll be listening, and you're not going to the game, you'll be listening to Kevin Burkhardt on TV. Kevin Burkhardt, Fox Sports, joins us next on the Team 980. matter where you're listening across the DMV right now, this is the song that you're hearing as the Commanders prepare to take on the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship Game. Fight for old DC. Last time Washington was in the NFC Championship Game, it was 1992, the 91 season into 92, and Mark Rypien was their quarterback. He is going to join us coming up at 5:30. But right now, a man who was in Detroit last Sunday, and he's going to be there on the call this Sunday, a very special edition of Not My Beat.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
Joining us now, he's the voice we'll be hearing as we're all watching this weekend. Kevin Burkhardt from Fox Sports with us here on the Hoffman Show. KB, you've known you're going to call this game for a long time. You obviously find out the participants with everybody else, but I mean, just how do you make sense of the fact that it's the Washington Commanders as one of the two participants, given, you know, where we were a year ago as I was having you on the show to talk about them hiring Dan Quinn, a first-year head coach, and all the journey that it's been for Washington to get here?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know when we talked a year ago, I told you how much I like Dan Quinn, I like that hire, and I think he's done what he's always done, right? He's instilled this culture, and he's got guys that really play their tails off, and then they happen to draft a quarterback who is a star. So it's been a nice little confluence of events, but that's essentially where they're at. So, look, if you would have asked me 2.5 months ago, would I be surprised? Yeah, of course. You know, consider the Lions and Philly and where they rank. But, you know, watching how they played really since that Week 16 comeback against the Eagles, I'm not. I mean, they're playing really good ball. They're playing the best ball of the year right now, and Jaden Daniels is absurd. So, yeah, I think it's, you know, look, right now it's the two best teams the way they've been playing, so we'll see how it goes down.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Of course, 3 o'clock this Sunday on Fox. You get Kevin, you get Tom Brady, you get the whole crew. When you sit down with Jaden in these production meetings, or you have the calls and all the stuff you guys do to prepare, is there another guy in the league? Because, I mean, the benefit of what you've been able to do for a couple of years now, being at the very top of the pecking order, well-deserved there at Fox, is like you get great games every weekend. You get to talk to the best of the best. Is there a guy that Jaden reminds you of as you sat down and talked to him earlier in the year or in the process of getting ready for this game?
You know, to be honest, this is the first time we had him was last week, so I hadn't talked to him at all. I mean, I talked to people, around him, and I obviously watched him in his interviews, but that was the first time I met him last week. And so that was great, first of all, to get a chance to do that. As far as who he reminds me of, it's a good question. I don't know if there's anyone that comes to mind right away about who he reminds me of. He's got this relaxed, quiet confidence. You know, he is really down to earth and smart and polite, but you can tell and there's a vibe there and a confidence there. And I think that's what shows on the field. You know, we had this shot last week when, I mean, he was tearing it up, and we went to shot on the bench, and he's sitting there, and you couldn't tell whether he was in an NFC divisional game or in a library. Like he's so cool. He's so cool in these moments. So yeah, personality-wise, no one jumps off the page that he reminded me of, but you know, playing-wise, and his poise and his demeanor has really been something to watch.
I hadn't thought of a perfect comp for him, or not a perfect, but a really good comp for him on the demeanor stuff. You know, there's like a little Mahomes there, whatever. But like the other day, Rich Eisen said Roger Federer, and I was like, oh, that's the one. Like you just see him do some of the craziest stuff you've ever seen, and then he just doesn't look like he's broken a sweat at all. And you know, as you're calling the game, and you said it's you and Tom up there for the first time seeing him last weekend, and he's doing some of the stuff that he's doing. Like, what are the conversations like as you guys go to commercial and you guys are talking about just what you're seeing as he's just putting touchdown after touchdown after touchdown on the board in that second quarter?
Yeah, well, we had a conversation about exactly that, right? Because obviously, like, you know, Tom can break down every play, and he did. And he was talking about some of his impressive decisions against the blitzes and things. But I said, oh, there's a point in the game that I just said, what do you think about his poise? And he was just really impressed. Like, you know, and you know, the cool thing about Tom is he's not impressed, like, easily. He's not like every player in the league is great. Every play is great. He loves the league and he loves football, but, you know, as you can imagine, from quarterback play, it takes a little bit to impress him, and he was impressed. And I think that's been the thing. I mean, you know, you can talk about so many things about Daniels, but his accuracy, his decision making, but his poise, like in those moments, in the blitzing moments, in the fourth downs, it's never too big and too fast for him. And that's why nothing would surprise me. The way he handled the end of the game, his first playoff game in Tampa, just so cool and calm in that whole last minute drive. And they had no answer for him last week. When they ran that triple option, it was pretty hard to contend with. And we'll see this week. Third time against Philly. First game, they weren't as successful and he had a hard time. Last game, obviously, he was off the charts, 5 touchdowns. So I am kind of fascinated to see how it all goes down. But I don't think there's anybody in the league playing, as well as he is right now. I know that.
Kevin Burkhardt, Fox Sports, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So one of the, you just mentioned how calm and cool he was against the blitz. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about the Philly matchups this year is the lowest blitz percentage that Jaden faced all season was the Week 11 matchup against Philly. Philly then decided, after that worked so well, to blitz him at the second highest rate they blitzed anyone this year in that second matchup. Knowing, having called a bunch of Eagles games and knowing Vic Fangio and kind of what they have done to different teams over the years, do you have any early lean about how you think that they'll attack Daniels after Tom was imploring Aaron Glenn to stop blitzing last week?
Well, I don't think they're going to do that. Look, Vic Fangio is the master at adapting. Not only in from matchup to matchup, but also in game, right? So I think the way that he was heating up in that game just kind of called for it to make something happen, and also the fact that Jalen Hurts was injured. I think he probably just felt like the need to make something happen. And, like he has for every other blitz, Jaden Daniels played well against it. So I'm fascinated to see how they're going to play him this week. And I think the same thing goes for Cliff Kingsbury. How is he going to react to that? And I think when you look at it, basically for 6 quarters, the Eagles played really good defense against them. And for 2 quarters, Daniels shredded them a little bit. So I don't know. It's a fascinating matchup. We know the narrative, though, is that the Eagles don't want to let up the big play. They're the best in the league at not allowing the big plays. In second half of that game, they finally allowed some. So to me, that's the story. Can you, A, be patient enough to just deal with what they're giving you and go down the field and possess the football? And I think Washington can, because that's what they've done the last 2 weeks. That's kind of what they've had to do to win, is hold the ball and be patient and march down the field and take their time, if you will. And I think they need to do the same thing here. I don't see them going into this game getting 10 explosive plays on the D. I just don't see it. So I think the way that they're going to win is the way that they won last week. They put 45 points on the board. Now, look, they had big plays last week. I'm not saying they're going to have none. But I think their patience and their willingness to possess the ball and keep the Eagles' offense off the field. And then when the explosive opportunity comes, maybe against a blitz or a blown coverage, well, then obviously if you can take advantage of it, great. But I think it's the same formula for them. And we'll see how both sides react.
Yeah, getting to that game script against the Eagles has been so hard. They've trailed for like 5 minutes since mid-December. I think since they lost the Commanders game. I think they've trailed for like 5 total minutes or something ridiculous. And speaking of explosives, I want to get to Saquon in a second. But one other guy I wanted to ask you about for when Washington has the ball. Can you remember a story quite like Zach Bonds? A guy in a first year at a new position that is legitimately an all-pro?
First year, so a guy that, really was a special teams player, occasional pass rusher. And then he comes here and they move him inside where he hadn't played. And he's not only an all-pro, but he might be the defensive player of the year. He was voted a finalist for defensive player of the year. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? It's also a pretty cool story on having an eye for talent and giving guys a chance and not to get, put into certain corners in their careers. I mean, he's legit. He's a freak. I mean, he's a big guy who could flat out fly. He's got great instincts. So it's pretty amazing. It's not a fluke. I think he just got put in the right spot. And, that happens a lot. But he is legitimately awesome, Craig. There is no fluke about it. He's put in the right position and the right defense and, playing somewhere that no one ever thought to play him, inside. Now, he'll get his pass rush reps and things like that, but he is a total all-around package, and it's the real deal. It's been a cool story.
Yeah, that speed for him is amazing. All right, to the Saquon of it all, because on the other side of the ball, it does seem on some level that simple. Can the Commanders be the team that held Saquon to like 40-something yards on 21 carries in the back, let's say, 3/4 of that last Week 16 matchup? Or are they the team that gave up 107 yards and 2 touchdowns on the first 7 carries or whatever those numbers were? What's your bet this weekend of how the Commanders attack it and what kind of success they might have?
Well, look, I think you look at this. Here's how you look at this, right? No one has stopped him all year, and I really don't think that's changing. I think the reality is this: you don't want him running for 225 on you, and I think if you really load up everybody and try to load the box and just give every effort to stop him, at some point A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith are going to kill you if you do it, right? So you have to find a way. I know the passing game hasn't been big in these playoffs, but the reality is that's not how they win right now. They win by getting ahead, having their number one defense control the game, and then crushing you with Saquon in the second half. That's how they win. So can Washington get a lead, force them to go into the pass game a little bit? I think Washington, your goal is to not have Saquon have 200 yards and have 3 touchdowns over 40 yards. I think that's the goal. You keep him to 100 yards and, the big plays minimal. I think that would be a win-win. But I think Craig, I think the issue is everyone's saying, oh, the pass game for Philly is not good. Like, I think it can be good. I just think the way they're winning is Saquon. So, I mean, do you want to have an effort to contain him while not singling A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith the entire game? Because I don't think that's a great formula either. So, it's delicate. The Eagles it's amazing. Like 2 years ago when they went to the Super Bowl, it's the Jalen Hurts show, right? Well, they are now the number one defense in the league, and it's Saquon Barkley's team. The narrative has changed on them.
Yeah, I would rather lose with Jalen Hurts beating me at this point than with Saquon beating me. But I guess if you lose, then you still lose. With Jalen, last thing for you, Kevin, when you watch him now and you're watching the tape back from last week, the game back from last week, especially after he got folded up on, does he look like a different guy? Because the numbers suggest there's something that's not right there. He's not even pushing the ball down the field, nevertheless being effective while doing it. Do you see the same guy that you've covered since that 2022 magical run, or does he seem a little bit off to you for whatever reason right now?
I think if you just look at the overall pass numbers and say, man, they're way down. Well, it's because they're running back at 2,000 yards. You can't do everything in one game. Now, I will say this, Craig, I think it is a big factor whether he can move around on Sunday, because, when you look at Saquon's greatness and the Eagles' offensive line, which is the best in the league, the other part of that is having the threat that Jalen Hurts can pull it and run like he did against the Rams last week for 40-plus yards and a touchdown. That's the threat. So if you take away that threat, that he can't do that, and I don't know if he can, with that left knee that you got bent back, that changes things a little bit. That's one less thing you have to worry about in your preparation and in your aggressiveness and flying to the ball. So I think in some way, I would think Washington would try to find out that answer early in the game and see exactly what he's capable of moving around with the football. Because if they don't feel he's able to move like he normally does, I think that changes how they go about making calls on the defensive side of the game. So to me, I think that's going to be really interesting early how they look and how they play Jalen Hurts.
I totally agree. Kevin Burkhardt be with Tom Brady, Tom Rinaldi, and Aaron Andrews Sunday in Philadelphia on Fox for the NFC Championship game. Kevin, always appreciate your time, sir. Have a great call and enjoy the heck out of it this weekend.
Greg, you're the best. We'll talk soon, man. Enjoy the game.
Thanks, sir.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Coming up at 6 o'clock, our Pick 6 at 6. Before that, at 5:30, Mark Rypien, Super Bowl 26 MVP, with us to talk about Jaden Daniels doing the thing that he did back in the day, leading Washington to the NFC title game, and hopefully Jaden can follow in Mark's footsteps and lead the Commanders to the Super Bowl. I mentioned that Pick 6 at 6 because we pick 6 players on Fridays that we think are going to have an outsized impact in the game, non-quarterback division. And I almost, Anthony, decided to pull a bit at 6 o'clock today. And you said, no, I want to stick with the regular Pick 6 because you had some guys in mind. You've been thinking about it. You had a week off last week. I had to do Pick 6 all by myself. Crushed it, by the way. But I was like, what if we just took all the players that Shane and Oxon Hill mentioned in his famed, are we really a better football team without Jahan Dotson call? For those that don't remember, for those that aren't diehards, for those of you that are new to the show, welcome. We have a lot of fun here. We think that we have some of the best football analysis that we can offer. We have great guests. And we might not take as many calls as other shows, but when we do, we get some good ones and some bad ones that are so bad that they, in fact, become legendary. None more famous than on the day that the Commanders traded away Jahan Dotson. Yes, Jahan Dotson. Caller Shane from Oxon Hill. Let's just say he wasn't a big Adam Peters fan.
The guy had 11 touchdowns over the past 2 years. Terry McLaurin has 9. Olamide Zaccheaus had 10 catches last year. Diami Brown had 100 yards last year. Are we a better team without Jahan Dotson? No, we're not. So
and you would think that would be enough. But it gets so much worse.
No, we're not. So stop all the baloney, man. We traded Montez Sweat, and now we have Cleveland Furrow, who had 2 sacks. And Dante Fowler, who had 2 sacks. We have Austin Eckler, who is 30 years old. Like, come on, bro. Kendall Fuller is in Miami. Curtis Samuel is in Buffalo. Cam Curl is in with the Rams. And we have a guy, Adam Peters, who's bringing in bums. And everybody's like, oh, just because we're bringing in new faces mean we're better.
Yikes. Anthony, should we go through name by name? It's one of my favorite things.
The call gets better and better when you listen to it back.
It somehow has just aged. Like this call in sports radio lore. I'm not a wine guy, but like there's some like 1942 Cabernet that LeBron has that this call is becoming. Hit play again, Anthony.
The guy had 11 touchdowns over the past 2 years.
Okay, so that's about Jahan Dotson. And then what did he say about Terry?
2 years. Terry McLaurin has 9.
Terry McLaurin, what did he do this year on the touchdown front, Anthony?
Is he at 13, 15?
He's at
14?
15 now. In the regular season, he had 13. That's
13.
the new franchise record.
Yeah.
Olamide Zaccheaus had 10 catches last year. Diami Brown had 100 yards last year.
All right, let's pause there. OZ's had some monster games this year. Also, he messed us up for the whole year. I just, in part, call him OZ, not Oz like Cliff did. Not that white guy mistake. But I'm like, wait, what is his name? Olamide. Because how does he say it again?
Olamide Zaccheaus.
Yeah.
Olamide Zaccheaus.
Olamide Zaccheaus. Just we're gonna call him OZ because Shane messed up what is correct in my head. By the way, De'Ami Brown had 98 yards in a playoff game last week. Next.
Are we a better team without Jahan Dotson? No, we're not. So stop all the baloney, man. We traded Montez Sweat, and now we have Cleveland Ferrell, who had 2 sacks, and Dante Fowler, who had 2 sacks.
All right, Dante Fowler had how many multi-sack games this year? Probably 2 or 3.
He had several.
Yeah, Dante Fowler's been fantastic. Ferrell's been okay, but you want to know what neither of them cost? The $26 million a year the Bears are paying Montez Sweat. Next.
We have Austin Eckler, who is 30 years old. Like, come on, bro.
How's the Austin Eckler signing going? Is he arguably one of the 4 most important offensive players this year?
Super dynamic.
Like, he's been their explosive play go-to outside of Terry. He had 2 explosives last week in the divisional round playoff game. They won on the road in Detroit to get them to the NFC Championship game. Next.
Kendall Fuller is in Miami.
Okay, so they've got Mike Sainer still now, who had 2 picks last week. Marshawn Lattimore's on the other side. That one, in Shane's defense, there was a bit of some consternation about the corner position this year. But I don't think Kendall Fuller was awesome in Miami. They kept Kendall. That would have been fine. But no one's confusing him with the world beater at this stage of his career. But who else did they let go that was irreplaceable?
Curtis Samuel is in Buffalo.
Okay, Curtis playing some good ball in Buffalo, kind of ish. He shows up about once every 4 weeks, which is kind of the Curtis Samuel bit. Like, he's real dangerous all the time. You have to account for him all the time. It's just he's not super consistent. I don't know that he was the world's best blocker either. And that seems to be an important thing about how they get down here, how they do business here. I don't think he fit the mold for what they wanted here in D.C. And again, the playmaker thing, they've been all right on that front. Who's next?
Cam Curl is in with the Rams.
Oh, Cam Curl last seen taking a bad angle on Saquon Barkley on that last 70-yarder. I think Jeremy Chinn's been just fine. Who would you rather have had this year, Anthony? Cam Curl or Jeremy Chinn?
Definitely Chinn.
Yeah, I think so. Especially because I think Cam Curl got a decent deal from L.A. Chinn's on a bargain basement deal here in D.C., and they might have to pay him next year, but at least they know he fits in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And they know what he's about. They know he brings a physicality and a versatility that is exactly what Dan Quinn wants. Anybody else?
And we have a guy, Adam Peters, who's bringing in bums, and everybody's like, oh, just because we're bringing in new faces mean we're better.
I'm not going to say Michael Davis is a bum because I think that's disrespectful. Michael Davis didn't work out. That's about the only thing they did in free agency that didn't work out. You can argue their draft class is worse than their free agency class. The problem with arguing that is Jaden Daniels was a part of the draft class.
Man.
So stop all the baloney, man. We could have done the entire pick 6 with people relative to Shane's call.
Yeah.
But now we don't have to because we just did that instead. It's the gift that keeps on giving, everyone. Mark Rypien. I'm sure he's thrilled to follow that. Mark Rypien, the Super Bowl 26 MVP, is next.
And there's been games they haven't punted before. So, I mean, it's like, what the heck? You don't see this normally. This is an anomaly in ways that, only he and that group inside believe in, because you would never think of that.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And it is our pleasure now to welcome to the show the man who led the Commanders on the field the last time Washington was in the NFC Championship game. 1991, of course, was the year he went on to win Super Bowl 26's MVP. Mark Rypien is with us here on the Team 980. Mark, pleasure to have you, sir. Welcome to the show, and thanks for some time today.
You're welcome, Craig. Yeah, it's pretty surreal that it's been this 2 more days. It will be the 26th of January, 1992. January 26th, 1992 was a big game, and it's kind of weird that 33 years later, we're back in the hunt again, and almost to a point where it's like, what the heck happened?
Yeah, well, that question, I'm sure there'll be a 30 for 30 documentary and all those kinds of things on. For right now, we just get to focus on the first return since that 91 season, as you said, 92, the year the game actually takes place. What do you remember from the NFC Championship game that year and that run in the playoffs leading up to the Super Bowl?
Well, I think you got to go all the way back to Joe Gibbs, and when he's coached this football team. He lost his first, I think, 6 games, and he didn't even know if he was going to be a part of this organization after that. And Mr. Cook stuck with him, and thank goodness, because there's not a greater man, greater coach that I've ever played under than Joe Gibbs. And I would have to say that, one of the things that you have to understand, Craig, is, and you're kind of a younger generation, is that the bar was set very high. Getting into the playoffs, in especially I was the latter of all the 3 guys, Joe and Doug and myself, that anything but going to the playoffs was considered in Washington a failed season.
Sure.
We had high expectations. The bar was very high, and then getting into the playoffs, anything other than going deep in the playoffs also was one of the things that we looked at. So we went to 4 Super Bowls in 10 years, and that's pretty impressive, and we won 3 of them, and with 3 different QBs, and that's been documented. And so it was a great era for football in the DMV, and I was the last of the dinosaurs. It was also the last of free agency. There wasn't free agency, so we were fortunate enough because of that. We did things on and off the field together, as families and in the community and charities and all that. We stayed around there because it meant something to us to be in that area, in that neighborhood, and win football games. And so it was just an incredible year. It started off, Tony Kornheiser had the bandwagon articles going early, 4 or 5 games in. We hadn't lost yet. Then about 6 games, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then it took Dallas to give us a little breath of wake the heck up and beat us at home in a close game to kind of rejuvenate and reset our clocks and go back to work and do what we did set out that year to do, and that's win a world championship.
So I'm so glad you mentioned the history there and your place in it for the younger audience that may not be quite as familiar. As someone who does this, I've done a little bit of research, Mark. So I prepared to ask you this question. Because Jayden has guys like Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler, and specifically Zach and Bobby, veterans who have been there. You, as the last of the 3 quarterbacks that won under Joe, you had some guys that had Super Bowl rings, and you were there in the background of the middle championship. So what did that experience mean, and what do you think it's probably meant to Jayden to have someone like Wagner around, someone like Zach Ertz on his offense to help guide him through this season?
Well, there's no doubt that helps. And I just knew that all these players, that guys, and there are probably 30 of them that had world championships and, had pedigree for the big game and had been in big games before. So that part of it was very rewarding because you knew that you weren't just by yourself and on an island. Everyone thinks that, this team from where they were last year, obviously, with the only 4 wins to come back and do what we did this year was certainly incredible. but there's a lot of guys, that contributed to that. Jaden has just been played at such an exceptional level, but I know in the back of his mind, knowing that he's got a core of veteran guys that have been to big games and played in big games, and Bobby playing for Legion of Boom, and Dan Quinn having coached in a Super Bowl and leading the Legion of Boom, and and having Zach Ertz playing Super Bowls and making plays for so many years. It really helps to know that you're not alone, because you got some of those guys, but you don't have the core of guys that I had that I knew that you could rely on. So it was pretty cool to see what Jaden's been able to do. There was a stretch there where he was banged up a little bit. We lost 3 straight games, and I think that was more attributed to his some of his inabilities physically to do things because of his being on men for the rib injury that he had early in the season. So, but we know what he's been able to do, and we know that when he's got the ball at the end of the game, especially these last 7 weeks, what's happened. And it's been nothing but phenomenal, and you just can't think of enough adjectives to use when you talk about Jaden Daniels, because he's held on to the football. He's made great plays. He's been a leader on and off the field. He's a wonderful kid to be around, and playing for a team that has very, very excited about where they're at, very, very versed on knowing where they're going. I think that's all kind of been predicated by the culture that Dan Quinn has brought in, the ownership group, with Josh Harris, Gabe Harris, his brother Josh, Mark Ein, Mitchell Rails, and Magic Johnson, and the ownership group, to Adam Peters and the administration group, and what they've been able to do to put a team out there and it's competitive, and then just to kind of believe in one another. That culture that Dan has brought in there is second to none, and I think that's kind of was always the case when I was in Washington. You had a great culture because you're expected to go out there and do these types of things. Now these guys are expected to play well. They trust in one another. They trust in each other, and they're just doing it at a very, very high level, and it's been fun to watch.
Mark Rypien is with us, Super Bowl MVP and Washington legend, here on the Hoffman Show. Did you have any early interactions? Because I know you're not around the team a ton, living on the opposite coast, but you come back for Legends events and things like that, and you've had a little bit of time around Jaden, a little bit of time with the ownership group, et cetera. Was there something where you were like, okay, they got this right? Was there a story or a moment that it clicked for you that you were like, wow, they got a chance here because they're doing the things that we did that make a team special?
It's not that I really got a chance to sit down. I met him, a couple times, and just in high, and just excited to watch him play and those types of things. I think he's kind of done it on his interviews. He's done it, on the sidelines, and even kicking the game-winning field goal against the Bucks. That he's just kind of calm, cool, and collected there. Just his demeanor and what he says and how he goes about his business and how he has such a great work ethic and how he trusts in his players and how he believes in what they're doing, just to me, told me everything I needed to know. And then, to know he's a faith-based guy that loves the game of football and plays for, these moments. We knew we had the right one.
When you look at Jaden as a player, Mark, Kirk Cousins, I don't know if you saw this when he was guesting on ESPN the other week. He talked about Pat Mahomes, and he's like, sometimes I watch and I just go, there's no way that guy plays the same position as me. When you watch Jaden and the way that he's able to act as a dual threat, and you think of how the quarterback position was largely played in your career, like you had 127 rushing attempts in your entire career. Jaden had 148 this season. How do you try to process that? Is like, this is the team I love, this is the sport I love, but this is not the same thing that I used to do.
Well, it just adds a different skill set for sure. Jaden's been able to do it in timing. He's probably one of the best rhythm passers out there.
For sure. And
gets a lot of credit for that too. But their offense is totally different. And it's kind of the change of the NFL, the change of the guard, to RPOs and some of the things that they're doing and that they're asked to do. He's a smaller figure, obviously, and it's only probably 190, 195 pounds, but he is amazing at being able to duck and get away from danger and understand that we need him out there on the field, and that, RG3 had a lot of those skill sets too. And it was so sad to see him get injured, because that was one of his attributes, is that he was able to extend plays and make things happen that others couldn't. So Jaden does that on a daily basis. He's got a great rapport with Cliff Kingsbury, and they're just work magically together, and they have an understanding of what they're trying to do. And he does these virtual glass things that I've never seen, but I wish they would have had some of those things just to maybe kind of get an idea of, that next level, player that is out there and how they're using technology to enhance themselves and what they're trying to do. So it's been fun to watch. It's really been exciting to see him do the things that he's done. A lot of times you'll get something like this and you'll think, oh, well, guys, learned a lot of these things through mistakes. Well, he hasn't made many mistakes. That's
right.
The crazy part about it. It's not like and there's been games they haven't punted before. So, it's like, what the heck? You don't see this normally. This is an anomaly in ways that, only he and that group inside believe in, because you would never think of that. In my era, if you talk to all those guys, Danny Marino and John and Randall Cunningham and all the fellas, they would think that, this is a different type of football, and it's really entertaining. Obviously, the rule changes help in some regards to what they're doing, but more importantly, it's incredible to see that he's not throwing 15, 20 interceptions and learning from those. He's making one bad play maybe every 4 games, and then just consistently makes plays week in and week out. So it's pretty awesome.
It has been a lot of fun to watch. You've clearly been paying attention as Mark Rypien is with us here on the Hoffman Show. So as you put your analyst hat on, Mark, for the game this weekend, what do you think is the most important thing for Washington to do to come out victorious and return to where you got back in 91, 92 and get back to the Super Bowl?
Well, I'd like to say, it's get off to a good start, but they, when I was legend of the game, like 5 weeks ago for the Philly game, we were down 2 scores right off the get-go. And we came back and kept the game close and all the way to the end where we took the lead. They took the lead back and we came and won it at the end. So nothing will surprise me. You'd like to take the fans out and get off to a great start. But if it doesn't happen, we also know that we can come from behind. So he's re-energized this whole fan base. I think our defense has been re-energized, knowing that we got a guy that we can trust. And I think the last half of the season, all the way to the end of the season here, our defense has been one of the catalysts that have helped propel us to bigger and better things. And they're playing at a very high level and keeping opponent scores down and allowing us to do the things we do offensively to win.
So I'll wrap with this then, Mark. As Mark Rypien with us for one more question here on the Hoffman Show. What's it meant to you personally to see this fan base get re-energized, for probably some connections to go back, some of your former teammates that are maybe a little more interested in being around after the 30 years of darkness that was the Dan Snyder era? What has it meant to you to see this all happen this year, this way, with this group, and I guess that all happening through your lens?
Well, kudos to the group of guys that have made that happen, to the culture that Dan Quinn has brought in there, to Adam Peters, to the ownership group, and to the players. More so the players, as far as just going out there and winning the trust back of this fan base that has just been salivating to have a year where we get to the playoffs, but not just years where, we've been to some playoff games over the last 33 years, not many. But it's been like, okay, we're going into the playoffs, and not like, hey, we're going in to go deep into the playoffs. We got an opportunity. We're going to set a culture here now that we're not going to change. And as long as we have number 5 and some of the core guys that we have defensively and offensively come back year in, year out, this is a team that I think could be like the Kansas City Chiefs, the Eagles, the Bills, and, that year in, year out, we're in the playoffs and we're vying for NFC Championship games and Super Bowls. So it starts this week, and it's just If it does, then hey, we're going right into the Super Bowl and trying to win another one. If it doesn't, we learn from this and we get better and better. And each and every year that we'll be a contender, we'll be there when it comes the playoffs, and we're going to be a force to reckon with for years ahead.
From your mouth to the football god's ears, Mark. Mark Rypien, Super Bowl 26 MVP with us here on the Hoffman Show. Mark, an absolute pleasure to chat, and hopefully we got much more to chat about over the next couple of years as this run continues.
Sounds good, Craig. Appreciate you.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
Our pick 6 is 6 coming at 6 p.m. because that's the whole idea behind the pick 6 at 6. It's at 6. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We try to make sense here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Stream live on YouTube. You know the drill by now. I was just perusing Instagram in the break, Anthony, and in the pick 6, we're not going to directly talk about Jaden Daniels because we say it's too easy to pick the quarterback. So it's the top 6 players on a Friday that we think are going to have a big impact outside of the quarterback. But I was perusing Instagram, and I just saw Tom Brady on his podcast that he does with SiriusXM, the Let's Go podcast, that he made a comparison of Jaden to Tiger Woods in the 97 Masters, where he was basically, he's talking to Jim Gray, who's the co-host of the show, and he goes, how do we measure poise? Like, how do we measure confidence? And when Tiger got to the 1997 Masters, nobody knew that he was ready for that moment. But if you looked back, it made all the sense in the world, because if you watched him play in like the U.S. Amateurs and all the other big tournaments he had played in, like he would destroy people, and it was always him versus him. And I feel like Jaden very much has that approach, which is interesting, I think, on a couple of fronts. And we've heard it now. Obviously, Tom's partner, Kevin Burkhardt, joined us earlier on the show and remarked how Tom was like, man, this kid's something different when he watched him and the poise that he played with in Detroit on Saturday night. Ian Eagle, who's been calling the biggest sporting events in the NFL and the NBA and college basketball for 30 years. And he joined us and talked about how the poise, and everyone just talks about the poise. But I think like that almost underrates the skill, because if you are poised as all get out and you shoot 18 over par, then nobody cares. Like, he didn't win the tournament, but he looked really calm and relaxed the whole time. He never blew up. He never threw a club. Okay, cool. Good job. Not Tiger Woods. Like, the poise helps you get the absolute best version of yourself. And this is kind of the conversation we had with Ian, right? Is I think at this point it's fairly clear that Jaden probably would have been pretty good anywhere. Like, his work ethic would have only allowed him to fail so much. By the same token, this is going to ruffle some feathers, but it's only amongst the worst people on the internet, so I don't care. If Drake May had been drafted here, I think Drake May would have been pretty good here, because I think the infrastructure here is really good. But I don't think Jaden would have been as good somewhere else, and I don't think Drake May would have been as good here, because the infrastructure meets the person, meets the player, and you get the maximal result. And what we're getting here is like the best version of what could possibly happen, which is why this has never literally happened before. And I just think that's pretty cool and worth pointing out. And I thought Brady's analogy kind of put that into focus for me, because, yeah, Tiger Woods in 1997 in the Masters was crazy, and the focus he had and the him versus him, that attitude is great. But like, if he got out there and was like, oh my God, this course is hard and these other dudes I'm playing with are good, then, and doesn't have the skill to match it, you never get the confidence in the first place. And so, like, it's a chicken and egg thing, but it's worth pointing out that if everyone's talking about the chicken, there's still the egg, which is Tiger was really good at golf and Jaden's really good at football.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also probably just crazy just because it's happening to a DC, sports team. We don't have those things, happen too often. You got Alex Ovechkin. You've had so many young.
Zimmerman. We actually have had a lot of young stars here, if you think about it, though.
Yeah,
right. You got now. Have they all panned out in championships?
Yeah,
no,
championship
for sure.
State,
Ovi's got the one, and like I think if you ask a lot of Caps fans, you probably should have had more over his career. What he's doing now is insane. Who knows? Maybe they'll get another one this year. The way they're playing. Harper and Strauss. Strauss gets one. Harper leaves before he does.
Yeah.
Trinity Rodman on the spirit side of it, which she's doing. By the way, she's still younger than Jaden is.
Which is crazy.
That's bananas. Bananas. And I really hope she's not about to leave, because apparently Chelsea and Arsenal are after her, and they're going to pay a lot of money. So please have those rumors not be true. But, like, there have been young superstars in this city. I mean, John and Brad are on a different level, like leveled down, all due respect to those dudes. They were electric and super fun to watch. 2016 is a thing that Wizards fans will never forget, but like they weren't generational.
Yeah, that's more so like what I'm getting at. I don't feel like I feel like people like the LeBrons, like you just gotta allow those players to, you know, take the world by storm, and we're finally like seeing it. Like we actually have one of these kinds of people in our own backyard, so it's just
special.
Exactly. You just gotta take it in like all at once, like with him, like it's crazy. Like we actually have one of those guys. Like we have a Patrick Mahomes here in the city. We have a Joe Burrow here in this. Like we have
especially at that position for this franchise, because like the legend of Gibbs is that he did it with 3 different dudes.
True.
Like Sonny's a Hall of Fame quarterback. Like, and there's been a couple of others. Like if you go back in history, Chris Berman style. But like the best quarterback in the league being in Washington, even when they were great and won Lombardis, was not what was happening. Mm-hmm. And so this is wholly unique in the history of, not wholly unique in the modern history of the franchise. You know, since the NFL merger, basically, that this is happening. And lucky us, here we are getting to talk about it. And of course, what are we going to do with that great fate? We're going to talk about everyone else. Although inevitably, a lot of the guys we're about to talk about, there'll be a Jaden angle to that too. Our Pick 6 at 6 NFC Championship Game edition is next. Can't believe it. It's the final hour of the week here on the Hoffman Show. Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. What happened to my voice there, Anthony? Always live as well.
Whoa.
What just happened to me?
Bro.
It was scary. Did you not hear it happen the first time?
I did.
Obviously accentuated a little. Anyway, we should keep things moving as fast as possible. Coming up at 6:30, Logan Paulsen. He's really smart. For some reason, he still works with me. Logan and I will preview how Jaden Daniels can try to break this Vic Fangio defense via take command. That's at 6:30. Right now, though, it is time for a Friday edition of the Pick Six.
The 6 biggest Commander storylines.
It is caught!
Delivered at 6 o'clock sharp. It's the Pick Six at 6.
We set out to find a leader, someone who could take this franchise to the next level, build an elite team that consistently competes for championships.
Wake up, Anthony. See you rubbing your eyes over there. Wake up. We got 6 players to pick.
I had something in my eye.
Oh, okay. All right, that's fair. All right, 6 players on a Friday that we think will have an outsized impact in the game on Sunday. The only rules are that we cannot pick the quarterbacks. No Jaden Daniels, no Jalen Hurts. Eagles and Commanders both on the table. Anthony, since I went first last week and second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth, I will allow you the first pick this week now that you have returned.
Number 1.
Number 1. Should I start on the Eagles offense or defense, Craig?
Offense.
Okay, then I'm going to go with Saquon Barkley. I think everybody knows that, though.
Saquon Barkley. I think that is probably the correct answer, Anthony. Why did you pick Saquon Barkley? As if anyone needs that explained to them.
In the first 2 games, I want to say the first game, 26 carries, 146 on the ground, 2 tuds. And to be honest, in the second game, he also had his first quarter anyway, 7 carries for 109 yards, 2 tuds, and then after that we, stifled him a little bit, slowed him down. But even if you just take those 3 big touchdown runs that he had and disregard those, even though it's hard to do it, I think we've done a solid job containing Saquon Barkley. It's just the fact that when he has that crease where he can break off a 23-yarder or a 32-yarder or a 68-yarder, that's when, it starts to, break the back of, the Commanders' defense. So I think if we can just do a good job of being disciplined, and Joe Wood talked about it earlier today, just stand in your lanes, everybody coming down, tackling him as a whole, and then, we'll be able to, limit him to an extent, but we just don't want him rattling off 2, 3, 20, 30-yard runs every game.
The chunks are what's going to kill you, and specifically the touchdowns. Honestly, I can live. Man, if his long rush is 30 in this game, as long as it's not 3 of them and they're all from the 30-yard line, you know. But if he busts a 30-yarder from the 20 and gets to midfield, and that's the longest rush he has all game, fine.
Yeah,
fine. To me, you can't give up 2 big ones. You give up 1 big one even. Okay, that's gonna hurt the average. That's gonna hurt the EPA per play. That's gonna hurt all the statistics. But I can live with 1. I can't live with 2 or more. That's where he crushes you. And you can't, as Dan Quinn said and Joe said, you can't get bored just doing the right thing. And he challenges that as much as anyone because he has a great way of just pressing and finding the front side of a run. And then you think he's going to hit that backside and you start to get a little antsy. I'm going to go get him. And then you vacate your gap and then bang, he goes exactly where he was trying to go the whole time, to the front side. He really pushes that stuff. And I'm trying to remember which pod it was. It might have been Robert and Derek. It might have been Mina on her show. I think it was Mina. Had really remarkable stat. The Commanders are actually the best team in the league on inside the tackle runs this year. They just
really,
because Bobby's in there.
True.
They don't let those things get out in between the tackles, and they actually do a good job of holding the line. But because Frankie and Bobby, especially Bobby, fire down, they have been the best or one of the best, depending on which statistic you're using, in between the tackles this season. Outside the tackles, they're bottom 5 in the league. So think of the big runs that teams have gotten on them. They're not off the center at those guys in the middle. It's when you get those guys moving and you can kind of push them out of the way a little bit and get a gap to develop, and then Chin or Frankie doesn't quite get where they're supposed to be, or Bobby gets caught up in the wash, and then all of a sudden that gets out. Dorrance Armstrong jumps upfield, Dante jumps upfield, and then a run gets out. That's where you absolutely get crushed against the Eagles because they're so prolific at getting on the edge. Their line is so fast, so mobile, so agile, so powerful. And then Saquon. So I think that's the challenge is you know where your weakness is. You know where you can get hurt. Can you find a way to shore that up? And can you just be ultimately laser focused? Like, the task is hard because it's not just Saquon. It's the best offensive line probably in the league, and certainly the best at this in the league. And so if you can focus and not make any mental mistakes and execute physically, you have a shot. Because Saquon's not the fall forward, get you 5-6 yards. Like, he'll get 3, then 2, then 2. And, like, then they're behind the chains, and now Jalen Hurts has to beat you. And I feel better about that than I do. They gave the ball to Saquon, and he got 20 yards, 1st and 10 again. So can you get that? And it's not even like it's 2nd and 5, right? It's going to be 2nd and 7. And then what do? Can you make it 3rd and 5? Now Jalen has to beat you. That to me is the real question, is can you just prevent the big one time and time again? Because they're going to run it. And then the other part is, can you score on them offensively to try to get them out of running the football? Which leads us to
number 2.
I have put this man in every single week in the playoffs. I am not stopping now. Number 2 is number 2. Dyami Brown. The Commanders need to find explosive plays in this game. It is how they broke the Eagles last time. Some of it was like the coverage busts were on the OZ touchdown where they were playing man-to-man. The guy who initially had OZ in man was the 12th man on the field. He ran off. Jaden extends the play. No one's covering OZ because it's man-to-man and he's got no man. And there's a touchdown. Okay, fine. But they also were able to get the ball deep behind the secondary in a way that they have not, or most other teams have not against the Eagles. And whether it's Terry, who I try not to pick in this just because, Terry needs to have a big game, or Dyami, like, he's the other option. So to me, Dyami becomes enormously important, especially if Kenyon Mitchell is either out or banged up. And we should actually have an injury report. Let me pull that up in a second here. But that becomes an enormous part of what Washington is doing. And then also, obviously we see the screen to Terry last week, but Dyami's consistently been their best screen guy. If the Eagles are going to give some space because they're playing these zones or zone matches, then they're at least going to start off the line of scrimmage. Can you then get that blocked up and maybe get a few, I want to say like a few explosives off screens? If you can, that's amazing. But for a Commanders team that has struggled to run the football until last week, can that be a replacement for your running game? Because if you can stay on schedule, if you can stay, in 2nd and 3 and open up your playbook, like, that is enormously beneficial. And the Commanders can often do that with the screen game, and Dyami's been probably their most consistent guy on that all season. So Dyami Brown's coming in at number 2 for me.
Number 3.
Number 3, Mr. Craig Hoffman. I'm going to go with Frankie Louvu. In the first 2 games against the Eagles, he's shown up in both games. First game, he had 2 sacks, 10 tackles. Like, he was all over the field. Granted, we end up losing. And then in the second matchup, he had an interception, also 7 tackles. So I'm looking for Frankie just to have, like, some type of huge impact plays. Like, he's played solid, this postseason so far. But I think there's more that, we've gotten from him this season. And I'm expecting him to go out there, have a big game, show up everywhere all over the field, whether it's in the pass rush or something in the run game. But I'm expecting him to have some type of game-changing play this game around.
Man, like, Frankie, the way that he was able to change, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. Doesn't always work as I try to pull up this injury report. But Frankie, the way that he changed that last matchup. I mean, they being the Eagles, were rolling to start that game. And then they have to put in Pickett, and then he lures Pickett into that interception. And that changed the entire game. And so whether it's a play like that, or if you can do that to Hurts, right? Can you do that? Playing him as a spy potentially, like Frankie's got the athleticism to do that, where obviously the scrambles have hurt Washington in the past, or as a pass rusher. I think the biggest thing for me is, like, can they finish? They've gotten pressure on Hurts this season, and Hurts takes a lot of sacks. Can they just finish the pressures? If they can do that, they can hold this offense as long as they're not giving up big ones to Saquon, as discussed. So I think that's a really good pick, and I think he has a huge, huge chance to shape this game. Again, if they can go +2 in the turnover margin, like, I want to say I don't know how the Eagles come back from that because, man, if the Commanders had been just +2 instead of +5 last week, they might have lost 48-45. It was that crazy of a game. But I don't think the Eagles have that kind of gas unless Saquon's just runs for 300. And Lord, knock on wood till my phone falls on the floor. But like, outside of that, I don't think they have that kind of gas. I know they have the players, but like structurally, if Washington is like, we're gonna put the lid on it, I don't know that they have that kind of gas. So I think that's definitely going to be an interesting thing to watch. And Frankie, not just the other thing I'll add, not just in the pass game, his not making mistakes in the run game, because there are times this year he's been the guy. He's been the guy that hasn't been in his gap. He gets a little antsy, tries to fire inside, tries to do something, or he gets blocked. Like, this is not the best part of his game, which is fine. He does plenty of other stuff that's at a more than worthy of having it level. But that is definitely something to watch on Sunday. All right, we got 3 more players to talk about in our pick 6 at 6 before Logan jumps on to talk with us about how Jaden can break this Vic Fangio defense. But first, let's get an update on the latest in the world of women's sports presented by Wawa. Chicken how you want it at Wawa with customizable or crispy roasted chicken sandwiches. You'll hear from Logan Paulsen before the end of the show. Big fella breaking down how Jaden Daniels can break this Eagles defense in the NFC Championship game. We'll get to it coming up in about 10 minutes. Right now, though, we continue our Pick 6 at 6, where we pick 6 players we think will have an outsized impact in the game. And the one I'm going to pick for number 4, Anthony, is one that we hope that the outsizedness is, wow, that was a lot less than we expected.
Number 4.
Number 4 is Jalen Carter. And I would pick a commander here, but I don't know with 100% certainty who the commander responsible is. I guess I could have gone Tyler Biadasz. She's got to be on point with getting everything targeted and making sure that Jalen Carter gets the attention he deserves. But probably Trent Scott starting at right guard. We'll see. He's a guy that did a tremendous job filling in last week. The tackle by position bouncing down inside, but Jalen Carter has become one of them dudes in the NFL. Just truly one of the absolute best interior players, one of the best D linemen, period, in the league. Disruptive and destructive against the run. Absolute nightmare in the pass. He's got a knack for punching the ball out. So when you run at him, he's dangerous. When you run away from him, he's fast enough that if you try to pull and all that kind of stuff away from him, he'll chase down your back from the backside. Like, you have to toss sweep away from him and hope that he doesn't catch you. Like, dealing with him is a nightmare. And to do it without Sam Cosmi, who had his own struggles against Jalen Carter. That's how good Jalen Carter is. That Sam Cosmi, who's one of the best 5 right guards in the NFL, was like, I got my hands full with this dude. Now you got Trent Scott, maybe Andrew Wiley, maybe Michael Dieter, maybe Chris Paul. One of them dudes is going to have to block Jalen Carter with probably some help. But dealing with Jalen Carter personnel-wise, and then whatever Cliff chooses to do schematically to try to give some help, I think it's going to be interesting. Like, do you just say, we're going to have a lot of 6-man protections when we throw, we're going to sacrifice ineligible, and we're going to have John Bates in the game a lot, and we're going to trust John Bates to block a defensive end one-on-one, because we're going to block down and have Andrew Wiley and, say, Trent Scott share the responsibility of Jalen Carter. Like, these are the questions that I would be asking this week in those meetings, and we'll see what solutions they come up with on Sunday.
Yeah, and one thing with Jalen Carter, Aaron Donald called him his replacement. I think that's a little scary, but it's also
I almost just crawled under my desk, Anthony.
Who he is. Like, he is.
No, he's not wrong. He's not. Logan said that this week, and I was like, relax. No one's Aaron Donald, to be clear. Aaron Donald was Jalen Carter plus. That's not to say that Jalen Carter isn't, like, on a Hall of Fame track with how good he is. That's just how good Aaron Donald was.
Yeah.
Number 5.
Number 5, Mr. Craig Hoffman. I'm going to go. I'm not sure if you had him in your pick 6 last week. I think, I don't know. John Allen, was he in your pick 6 last week?
No, he should have been. I had Deron Payne instead.
Yeah, I'm going with John Allen this game. And one, I think of all the interior defensive linemen, really all of the defensive line, he's the freshest. And I think a lot of that was on display last weekend, just because I want to say that was probably one of John Allen's best games in the last 2 years, if I'm being quite frank. Granted, he didn't get the sack on Jared Goff when he had the pass to
Laporta touchdown.
But the pressure, the fact that he
should have been good enough to force an incompletion. That's just all-time catch by Laporta.
Yeah. But I'm expecting him just to be able to go out there and sort of kind of duplicate the performance he had last week. We're going to need that. And also in the game against the Bucks, where, he didn't really have a lot of stats to show for, but the fact that he was good at the point of attack, he allowed Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louisville to get downhill to, fill the holes and tackle Bucky Irvin in the backfield, things of that nature. We're going to need that. Just because when we had Chase, when we had Montez, everybody was playing for themselves. And it seems that he's bought in, Deron Payne is bought in, and they're allowing and trusting their linebackers to come up, fill the holes, and do what they got to do, to be honest. So,
yeah, I
think John Allen's going to have a good game.
Yeah, I think that is a definite good call. Also, it's worth mentioning, as we have pulled up the injury report, Cam Jurgens is questionable for this game. They're starting center. So if all of a sudden Landon Dickerson has to slide down and play center, you have a backup at left guard. And then, obviously, a guy in Dickerson who's awesome, one of the highest paid and best guards in football, playing out of position. and their target hits and all that kind of stuff. Like, how used is he of calling protections? Obviously, he's not used to it. He's probably capable, but it's a different beast. And so I think John could then make that a nightmare. Also, speaking of injury report, Duran missed all 3 days of practice this week. Now, he's been around long enough that he doesn't need to practice to play, but it's not like he's Bobby Wagner. Now, defensive line is also probably the simplest position, if we're being honest. But just that's worth noting. So it might be a higher snap count. It might be a higher need for John to play a little bit more. We know that last year they got played way too much in terms of the rotation. And Dan likes to roll deep, but you might need a little bit more John Allen, and you definitely need a lot from John Allen if you're going to get this dub on Sunday.
Number 6.
Last but not least, how about a former Eagle to close this thing down? Zach Ertz. Commanders just don't have a lot of guys to beat man-to-man coverage. It's just not how this roster is built from wide receiver standpoint. It's certainly on the to-do list for the offseason, which is something we hope is still 3 weeks away. But Zach Ertz is one of those guys. And specifically, if he's matched up with Gardner Johnson, who's a wild card. I almost put him in here. It's like, can we get a bad CJ game? Or do we get a great CJ game? Because that dude is a nightmare in more ways than one. But also Zach Bond, who's been just a revelation this year at inside linebacker. He's obviously playing fantastic ball. But Nakobe Dean is out, so can they take advantage of Oren Burks, their middle linebacker, as Dean went out for the season? So I think there's a lot of different things that are interesting and intriguing about the matchups. But ultimately, like, in gotta-have-it situations, if the Eagles play man, which is what you would think they would do based off the fact that Jaden is not as effective from an efficiency standpoint against man as he is versus zone, Zach is one of those guys that he can rely upon to win one-on-one. Can you get enough separation that you create a window that you can use your big body to catch the football? And I think he's really essential. I thought about Jamison. Obviously, he had the big game last time out. In the short areas, he can be good against man-to-man, but he's not a guy who's going to beat you with long speed. And Cooper DeJean's really quick in the slot. So I think finding the matchups is going to be really tough for this offense because they just don't, like, you're going to have to rely on scheme. That's kind of what they've been. And then Jaden is great at finding space. The Eagles don't give you a lot of space. But Zach Ertz is a guy who knows how to manipulate space. He's really reliable. And I think to go back into Philly and have a big game, and especially if they need him to find some things in the red zone, man, how cool would that be for Ertz to do that in Philadelphia, an Eagles legend going back for Washington and doing the damn thing. That's just a nice poetry to it. And this season full of stories. Why not one more? Why not one more?
It will be cinema if he did that. Oh my gosh.
Get those cameras ready. All right, that's our pick 6. NFC Championship Edition. When we get back here on the Hoffman Show, take command. Logan and I talking about how Jaden Daniels can get it done and take the Commanders to the Super Bowl. It's the Hoffman Show. We're live on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. To wrap us up, can't let you leave on a football Friday without a little bit of Paulsen. So how does Jayden Daniels break the Eagles defense like few quarterbacks did, but he did in Week 16? Again, take command. Takes us home.
It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. It's NFC Championship week. That means we have Commanders, Eagles to preview. The thing that we've thought all along. Jokes like that are never going to get old, Logan.
Yeah, absolutely. Never going to get old. So here we are talking about the Eagles again for the third time, and we're going to try and bring some new spicy takes on the Eagles as we go. So
yep, two teams that have gotten here by doing essentially what they do. What new information could we uncover? I don't know. Let's find out over the next 45 minutes to an hour. All right, we're going to start off with the offense of the Commanders and when Jayden Daniels has the ball. And I do think there's some interesting choices for Vic Fangio to make. And because we have 2 games worth of data, we've actually seen him make both choices this year. And surprisingly, after choice 1 worked the first time, they didn't do it again in game 2. They tried to mix it up and it did not go as well. That choice, Logan, is they pressured Jayden Daniels the lowest that anybody did all season in their Week 11 matchup. The Eagles then had their second highest blitz rate of the season for them in Week 16 against Jayden. In the first one, didn't really do a whole lot offensively, did Washington. In the second one, Jayden threw 5 touchdown passes. So it might seem that they might not blitz a whole lot, but also teams can't stop blitzing Jayden, even though he's great against it. What do we think happens on Sunday on that side of the ball?
yeah, so I think it's interesting because like even when they do pressure, it's not like they're not like crazy pressures. I think when you think of like blitzing, people think of like Detroit or Tampa Bay, and probably because of those teams who've played most recently, Philly is kind of pressuring in a little bit more conservative of a manner. Like it's all sim pressures. It's all like they occasionally rush 6, but that's usually on rundowns, like as a way to stop the run, kind of build a run structure. But like when they're rushing the passer, they're just trying to get to like a 4-man overload, right? So they're just trying to bring one and then one extra, and then they're usually dropping someone out. So it's like true zone 4-man pressures. So like even those pressures, even though they seem, it sounds like Philadelphia was being very aggressive, I thought it was just a nice way for them to get to different rush patterns. And when you go back and watch the first half of the second game, it really befuddled Washington in a way that was kind of unexpected. Like they had a really hard time picking it up and some of the empty protections and things like that. So what I would say is I'd expect there to be a mix of both. I think they take the things that worked in the second game and also the things that worked in the first game. And ultimately what I think is that you probably say, we want to, as Philadelphia, rush for play coverage, whether that's man, quarters, match, whatever it is, probably a little bit more man. They've played more man the back half of the year, right? And just say, we will throw the changeup of these zone pressures, which were very effective. We're just going to be a little bit more selective about when they do them. And so if that's the case, I think that makes it a little bit harder to prep because, you know, one of the things about Jayden Daniels and this offense and Cliff Kingsbury is if you get like a good feel and a good bead. So for example, like when we were talking in our production meeting, it was like, if they're playing a lot of man and rushing 4, what's the plan? It's like, right. I'm going to send the protection to Jalen Carter. I'm going to make sure there's even chip help maybe on Jalen Carter with the back or whatever we're going to do. I'm going to kind of say the tackles, you're on your own. We're going to really focus on him as someone we need to protect. And then I'm going to run a lot of man-beating concepts that get the ball out quickly, right? However, if they start bringing some of this sim, 4-man rush, 4-man overload pressure, that we're going to play a little bit more zone behind it, that becomes a little bit more complicated to do. And so I think you'll probably see a mix of both just because I think it's good defense. Take what worked well. Don't overexpose yourself, right? Because I think that's something we were talking about is maybe they overexposed themselves in the second matchup while also bringing that conservative, solid approach that you had in the first one.
So the Eagles have gotten pressure on over half of their blitzes against Daniels this season, 52.4%, but came away with just 1 sack. So despite the pressure, Daniels has taken advantage of the less coverage defenders by completing 11 of 17 passes against the blitz for 193 yards and 3 touchdowns per next-gen stats. So I think the thing with him, the more I think about it, the more I watch, the more I talk to people, is he just has like a supernatural spatial awareness. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily that he's and I'm not saying this verbatim, like this is how he processes it, but this is kind of how I watch it, right? It's not even that he's like reading the coverage. It's just like, oh, there's space. Like he just has an ability to see space as a runner and certainly as a passer where it's like, oh, that blitzer's coming. There's space behind. I know my route concept. I'm about to have a guy sit down right there. I'm going to fire the ball to him. And he just seems to have like a supernatural awareness of where, almost like he has a heat map of the field and he can see where the gaps are. And when you take defenders out of coverage, then he can find that extra space with a regularity that's, amongst the best in the NFL, period. Nevertheless, for a rookie, nevertheless, for a guy who can also hurt you with his legs. So I think that's the conundrum is, in week 1, they just didn't do that. Or week 11, I should say, they didn't do that. 12.5% blitz rate. So they had 7 in coverage all the time. And in week 16, 35%. And that's just too many opportunities for him, man or zone, to find where that extra space is and where he should be distributing the football.
Yeah, and it's funny when you look at the second matchup, I actually thought the Philadelphia Eagles defense did a good job outside of like 4 plays. Remember there's the explosive play to Diami, there's the explosive play to Terry, there's the explosive play to OZ. And those things are traditionally not stuff that the Philadelphia Eagles defense gives up. But like one of the things that happened in that game is Jaden Daniels would break the pocket or extend or mess up the timing with the type of arc that he was putting on the football. I think we talked about that in the review show. Like he's putting these balls out there, like with tremendous arc, tremendous timing, letting the receivers run under it. And I just wonder how repeatable that is. And I wonder if you're Vic Fangio, are you worried about that? Or are you just like saying like, he's not going to do this again? Because again, those are relatively low percentage throws. Like there's a ton of variance in those kind of deep down the field shots. A lot of defenses kind of encourage you to take those shots because they are so low percentage. And then you say like, well, he got the explosive play to OZ where he broke contain and they had 12 men on the field. They ran the man coverage player off the field that had OZ and it led to an explosive play. So I kind of wonder if they kind of say like, that's the anomaly in this and we just got to do what we do well, kind of what you're saying, and just stick with the things that we did so well in the week 11 matchup. Because again, this defense is very, very good. And, they are a little bit banged up in the secondary. Quinyon Mitchell's on the injury report this week, so that'll be interesting if they feel like they have to be more aggressive if he's out of the lineup. But again, like they just do so much well, the Philadelphia defense, that I'm kind of like, maybe that was an anomaly from an offensive performance for Washington, and they just kind of say, hey, we're going to throw the fastball right down the middle and see if you can hit it.
I definitely think that's possible. I mean, Vic Fangio's been one of the best DCs in this league for a long, long time. And if he's like, I trust my stuff, I'm going to do it, especially with the talent he's got, I think it's hard to argue. The problem is there's a next-gen stat for this too. Daniels completing 52.2% of his passes when targeting vertical routes this season, 5th highest in the NFL, highest mark by a rookie since 2018. But here's the kicker in terms of, is this an anomaly on these bigger vertical routes? I know not all of the big plays they hit were verticals.
Anomaly is not. It's like, statistical. I'm calling statistical variance. At some point, is it going to regress, right? Yeah. Okay.
So Daniels led the league with 14.6 yards per attempt on such passes, throwing 12 touchdowns, including 4 in Week 16 against the Eagles, and only 3 picks. Yeah. So it would tell you that you can take that bet on statistical variance, but it's not the 50-50 or even more tilted in the defense's favor that it would be against most quarterbacks. So I think that, ultimately, like I had a great conversation with Robert yesterday on the radio show. And there's 2 things that he said that I thought were really, really smart on this. One, I think that when we talk about man coverage against mobile quarterbacks, there's this notion, this thought that you can't do it because our eyes are on the receivers and it's going to open up run lanes. And he said the numbers don't actually bear that out. Scrambling quarterbacks will hurt you just as evenly against zone as they do against man. So the idea that like we can't play man against Jaden Daniels is silly because of that reason. Now maybe there's other reasons you don't want to. The numbers would say that's actually incorrect, that he'll destroy zones at a much higher rate. The other part of that is if you look at just the roster construction of Washington's offense, I would make the receiving talent beat me. And maybe that's a more difficult proposition now that De'Ami Brown has discovered a new level. But I would, if I was Philly, I would be willing to take that bet and challenge that. Jameson is very skilled in a very specific set of things, but OZ, same thing. But these guys are not the best receivers in football who crush man-to-man coverage. They're great zone receivers who have a good feel, can get down, find the space, make guys miss after the catch. But you got to get open first against man. And so I just tend to think that they should lean maybe the heaviest. I mean, they've been playing a lot more man second half of the season,
it's
including
like 60%, right, or something like that. It's like
that quarter's match has gone straight man in a lot of situations. And so it's something they're comfortable doing. It has been the Achilles heel of Washington's offense. Last week against Detroit, just a 41% success rate on dropbacks where it's 4 or 5 man pressures and man coverage on the back end. Like, I think you kind of have to make them beat you that way. And then it comes to the question of, can Jaden do it? And I think he can, but it's the hardest way for him to play.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I think back to, again, I've referenced this before, but Pittsburgh played them that way, and it's not like he wasn't seeing it effectively. It's the throws were just a touch off. You know what I mean? They're just a touch off, and that was kind of with the rib injury. And then you look at the Philly game, and again, the rib injury is still a common thread here. But, like, he was seeing it well. The throws were into such tight windows. Then you look at the third game with Philly. So I'm kind of looking at these 3 games as case studies. And in the first half, I actually thought, man, like, that's a really good throw on a tight window dig with a man coverage player. It wasn't man, but like he's matching the dig. It's a tight window throw, and the ball gets dropped. Or here's a slant, tight window, ball gets dropped. And so there is an element to, like, he sees it okay, but the ball just isn't completed at a super high percentage the way it is in these other coverage structures that you're seeing. So I think maybe that's the point here and it's not only, this is the other thing I think you brought up a good point. Like, you want him to play man coverage. And again, the Washington receivers aren't the best at consistently beating man coverage. Like, they're a good group. They've punched above their weight class. Terry McLaurin's done a great job. Diami's resurgence is amazing, all those things. But I also think the thing about Philly that makes them so effective is the rush coupled with the coverage is something that is very unique to them. They've got a lot of guys that can win one-on-ones. Williams and Carter on the interior do a great job when you watch them. They push the pocket at a really high level. Nolan Smith's playing a lot better. Sweat's playing well. The Jalix Hunt, I think is the guy's name, number 58 for them, is starting to play better on the perimeter and create consistent pressure. He's kind of this power, strong build rusher. And I'm like, man, that's the thing that becomes problematic is dudes will get open, but the rush has been so consistent for them. Like, they don't really have to blitz. They do sometimes, obviously, but, like, that's the thing that makes that defense good. It's like they're the gatekeepers for the coverage. Like, they basically are like, you will not have to cover longer than 1.7 seconds because one of us is going to win. And that shows up pretty consistently when you watch them on film. And it's not, maybe it doesn't show up in pressure rates, but the way they affect the passer is very, very high. And I was talking to Dan Quinn about this at the beginning of the season. He's like, sometimes our pressure rate is different than, like, the NFL or Pro Football Focus pressure rate because, like, let's say you bull the guard back into the quarterback's lap, like, that's affecting his process in terms of throwing. And we count that as a pressure, even though, like, you're not on the other side of the guard, and that would be technically a pressure by PFF's metrics. So I think that's really another story for me that is somewhat compelling. I think the coverage structure is a big deal, but, like, again, in the second matchup when they were blitzing a little bit, like, he was finding the open guy. He just couldn't deliver the ball because the rush was so aggressive. And so I think that's, to me, another huge story, especially with Sam Cosmi out. Like, how do you kind of balance all that?
Yeah, I think we're going to get to that in 10 seconds. But I think the other thing, too, that's, about Jaden is speeding him up isn't necessarily the best way to get the worst out of him if you're a defense because he sees it so quick. It's almost like, can you slow him down and have him sit back there and get kind of antsy in the pocket and feel like he should be running or he should be having the ball out? That's when he sometimes takes some sacks or, gets a little greedy. So I think that's something to watch too with, like, how much do they aggressively rush and how much do they mush rush with 4 or with more?
Well, it's like the second interception that he had against Philly, right? It's he gets flushed, he's holding on the ball, he's trying to make a play, throws the ball late over the middle of the field, and he doesn't do that a lot, right? He's been very, very good about not turning the football over, but he is a human being and he does make mistakes, and I felt like that was a good example of where it's like, they kind of, it wasn't a mush rush necessarily, but they kind of flushed him from the pocket. He's trying to make a play, makes a bad decision. So I think that's another element too, is like, what kind of game flow is this going to be for the offense? And can you be a little bit more conservative? Do you see some more punts in this game than we have from Dan Quinn? Because the Philly offense doesn't really put the screws to you the same way Detroit does. They're a little bit, it's a slower paced game. It's like, it's a very 1980s style of football. It's like we're going to play great defense, and they consistently play great defense, and we're going to run the ball, and we're going to shorten the game. We're going to win by one possession. And so, like, do you feel the same urgency to, like, maximize every possession the way they did versus Detroit? I don't know.
I would. I want to make this game a track meet.
I know. I think that's right. But I think, like, so for example, like, let's say you're on the 50-yard line, right? Is it because you know that you're not going to get lapped the same way by the offense? Like, do you just punt it? I agree. You want to come out and score. I just saw a crazy statistic. Since the last game, which I think was week 16? When did they play them last? Week 16?
Yeah, week 16.
Philly's only trailed for 5 minutes. 5 minutes in all those games. That's including the playoffs. They are used to winning a very specific type of game. They don't play from behind. They play with a lead. They lean on their defense. They lean on the run game. Jalen Hurts is way deleveraged right now in the offense, and that's how they win games. So if, to your point, if you can get out and put them in a 7-point deficit, like, what happens? Do they just try to throw the ball over the yard and they can't operate in the game flow that they want? So I think that's a really interesting element too, in terms of how aggressive you are offensively and the messaging you give to Jaden Daniels. Because maybe it's like, hey, we don't need to be hyper aggressive like we were against Detroit, but that's the thing that's kind of got you to this point as an offense and as a team, is that you are very aggressive. So I think there are some really interesting storylines from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, Commanders averaging 34 a game in the playoffs. Philly's giving up 16 a game in the playoffs. So two very contrasting styles on this side of the ball.
16? Man.
16 points per game in the playoffs. here we go, wrapping up on the NFC Championship edition of a Friday edition of the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Anthony, there is one thing left to do, my friend. It's pick the game. We've given all our keys. We've said what we think is going to happen in terms of the matchups and who's important and things to watch. We've done the thing that we do. We brought great guests. We have Mark Rypien, Iron Eagle, Kevin Burkhardt just today here on the show. Now as the rubber meets the road on the pick side of it, which we chalk up as important. I've said all week, the thing I feel most comfortable about is Washington +6 or +5.5 or +6.5. It's been all three at various times this week. It's been a weird week, man. And I thought I would bring myself to picking Washington by Friday straight up. And I don't think I'm there. But they obviously can win. And if I picked against them both playoff games, did I pick against them in Tampa?
You picked against them last week, and I think you picked against them Tampa too.
So let's just not mess with a good thing. I would love nothing more than be wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong. I think if the teams play 10 times, the Eagles win 6, the Commanders win 4. So for that reason, I'll pick Philly. I don't want to be right. I don't care about being right. Over the course of the season, I put a lot of stock in my picks. I don't put a lot of stock in this one. Anthony, the floor is yours to do the thing that
Mr. Craig Hoffman. Mr. Craig Hoffman, I will tell you right now, Anthony Haney III will be eating himself a good luck glizzy at the halftime of Sunday's NFC Championship game. Give me them Commanders, baby. Give me them. 27-20. We're going to the Super Bowl, dog. New Orleans. Here we come.
Anthony and his good luck glizzies. Anthony, if you go to the game, you're going to have to get a hot dog at halftime.
Oh, I most definitely will, sir.
All right,
no question.
How can we argue with the good luck glizzy? It's powered 7 wins so far. See if it can power an 8th and a trip to New Orleans. We'll talk about it right back here on Monday. See you then on the Hoffman Show. Let's go, Commanders.